For thousands of years, towering toward the heavens and mingled with the sands of time, stood the colossal structures of the Egyptian pyramids. They were far more than mere stones stacked atop one another. They were the dreams of a civilization reaching toward the gods. These monumental stone edifices, born of the Pharaohs' desire for immortality, the silent gaze of the gods, and the sweat and toil of the people, carry and embody one of humanity's greatest mysteries. In this video, we embark on a profound journey into the hidden truths that lie in the shadow of the Egyptian pyramids, woven from the wrath of vengeful gods. The power of the pharaohs, the prophecies of seers, and the suffering of the people. This epic tale opens a window beyond time itself. In the shadow of the Egyptian pyramids, pharaohs, gods, and eternity, we will uncover not just piles of stone, but the very soul of a belief system, a civilization, and a passion. I encourage you to watch attentively, as each segment of this narrative will transport you further beyond the veil of time. The pyramids are not merely tombs. They are symbols of eternity. And now, you are about to open the gate to that eternity. Before we begin the video, I have a small request. What will this journey make you feel? I ask you to close your eyes for a moment and imagine walking in the shadow of the pyramids. What stirs within you? Please share your feelings in the comments, and don't forget to watch the video until the very end. With each episode, we'll go deeper. For every mystery we uncover, a new one will emerge. Remember, this is not just a documentary, it is a door into the depths of time itself. The first chapter begins now. Take a deep breath, lean back, and together, let us step into the boundless deserts of Egypt. The scorching light of the sun blanketed the western bank of the Nile. As the dunes carried echoes of ancient prayers on the wind, a timeless voice echoed across the ages. The pyramids still stood tall, still majestic, still cloaked in mystery. These stone giants were believed to be portals, carrying the sacred bodies of pharaohs into eternity. Each one was the sealed manifestation of a covenant made with the gods. But this covenant was not only written in the heavens, it was etched into the earth with blood, sweat, and faith. When the foundation of the first pyramid was laid, the calendar marked approximately 2700 BCE. This structure was the Pyramid of Djoser, one of the earliest known large-scale stone constructions in human history. Its architect was none other than Imhotep, whose name would be inscribed in history with golden letters. Imhotep was more than just an architect. He was a seer, a sage, and was regarded as the earthly reflection of the god Thoth, built for Djoser's peace and eternal life. This pyramid heralded a new era, the Pyramid Age. The pyramids built during this period were not merely architectural marvels. Each one symbolized something greater. Every stone, every path, every stair represented the pharaoh's journey to the stars, to the gods, and to eternity. The orientation of the pyramids was aligned with the stars. The largest pyramids were placed to correspond with the Orion constellation, for the ancient Egyptians believed that after death, the pharaoh would ascend to join the stars of Osiris. But behind these constructions, there was more than just belief. Thousands of laborers, slaves, and artisans took part in this grand undertaking, each for different reasons. Some believed in the sacred duty of serving the pharaoh, others sought a better life. Some were brought by force. They did not just bury their hands into the stones, they buried their souls. Each pyramid can be seen not only as a tomb, but also as a message. These messages were carved into the stones through hieroglyphs, symbols, and the language of the gods. The inscriptions revealed details of the afterlife and described the pharaoh's eternal journey. But above all, they were meant to strike fear into the living and protect the peace of the dead. For those who trespassed into these tombs would incur the wrath of the gods. Following the early monumental complexes, the Giza Plateau became the heart of Egyptian history. It was here that the most iconic three pyramids were built, those of Khufu, Khafre, and Menkaure. The Great Pyramid of Khufu still stands today as one of the seven wonders of the ancient world. But how was this structure built so grand, so symmetrical, and so enduring? To this day, there is no definitive answer. Some theories suggest the use of ramp systems, while others propose more complex lifting mechanisms. But one truth remains. Those stones were placed not by ordinary hands, but as if guided by the will of the gods. Pharaoh Khufu's name represents the immense power hidden behind this structure. During his reign, the outskirts of Giza were not merely a construction site. They were the center of a cosmos. Every stone, every shadow, every path was part of a ritual. Not only were physical structures being built, prayers were too. And those prayers are still whispered today in the wind of the desert. But every power brought with it a shadow of fear. Every stone laid was not only an offering to the gods, but also a burden on the backs of the people. As the pyramids rose, so did hunger, thirst, and rebellion in the cities. Those who paid the price for the divine power of the pharaoh were often the ordinary people, those whose names were never recorded. Their stories were not etched into stone, their prayers were not written on papyri, but now we will hear their voices too. As this first chapter ends, the next will introduce you to the gods behind the pyramids. Who were they? Why were they so powerful? And how did they come to rule the very heart of a civilization? The sun that rose along the banks of the Nile was not merely a source of light. It was the sacred breath of life. Each morning's sunrise was seen as the breath of the gods, and this breath, united with the reign of the pharaohs, guided the course of the universe. In ancient Egypt, the gods did not dwell in distant heavens, but lived at the very center of daily life. The deepest motivation behind the pyramids was not merely to carry the kings to the sky, but to preserve the divine order on earth. For without the gods, pharaohs were nothing. But without the pharaohs, the gods too were doomed to be forgotten. Both were bound in a sacred cycle, each completing the other. In this second chapter, as we step into that ancient world, the first god you must come to know is Ra, one of the greatest in the Egyptian pantheon. Ra, the sun god, would rise each day in the east, sail across the sky in his celestial boat, and descend into the west at dusk, entering the Amduat, the realm of the dead. Each night, he battled the demon Apophis in the underworld, and by morning he was reborn, beginning the cycle of life anew. Ra's eternal journey was seen as the model for the pharaoh's spiritual path. That is why the pyramids were aligned to the east and west. Life began in the east and reached a new existence through death in the west. After Ra, the next god to know is Osiris. Osiris was the god of death and rebirth. According to mythology, Osiris was betrayed by his brother Seth, who trapped, dismembered, and cast him into the Nile. But thanks to the miraculous powers of his wife, Isis, Osiris was resurrected. This resurrection lies at the very heart of Egyptian belief. Death was not an end, but a transformation. The burial chambers within pyramids were modeled after the tomb of Osiris, for when a pharaoh died, he became one with Osiris. He too would be reborn, ascend to the stars, and become equal to the gods. Another powerful deity was Anubis. This black jackal-headed figure was the guardian of mummification, rituals, and the guide of souls. Anubis's duty was to escort the soul to the presence of Osiris for judgment in the afterlife. The heart was placed on a scale and weighed against the feather of Mut. If the heart was light, the soul would enter paradise, Aru. But if the heart was heavy, it would be devoured by a terrifying creature named Amut. That is why every pyramid contained symbols, prayers, and images of Anubis. For success in the life that followed, death depended not on earthly power alone, but on divine balance. The order of the gods revolved around the concept of Ma'at. Ma'at meant order, justice, truth, and cosmic harmony. The pharaoh was tasked with upholding Ma'at not merely as a king, but as a divine representative on earth who ensured balance on behalf of the gods. If the pharaoh grew weak, drought would descend, enemies would draw near, and the Nile would cease to flood. For this reason, the people not only obeyed the pharaoh, but also worshipped him. He was the son of Ra, and during ceremonies, like the annual Opet festival, he would reunite with the gods and symbolically ascend to the heavens before the eyes of the people. Isis, Horus, Hathor, Thoth, Bastet, and Sekhmet. Egypt's pantheon was too vast to count. Each deity represented a distinct aspect of life. Hathor was the goddess of love and motherhood. Thoth, the guardian of writing and knowledge. Horus was the living embodiment of the pharaoh. Every pharaoh was considered the earthly manifestation of Horus. That's why, during coronation ceremonies, the pharaoh's name was always linked to Horus. The light emanating from his eye illuminated the destiny of the people. This belief system was not merely spiritual. It also served as a political instrument. The stronger the pharaoh portrayed his connection to the gods, the greater his influence over the people. And the will of the gods found form in the pyramids. Each pyramid was dedicated to a deity. Every interior chamber was drawn according to a divine plan, from the entrances to the burial chambers. Every element was aligned with celestial symbols and the will of the gods. Contrary to popular belief, the pyramids were not just tombs. They were also temples. The rituals, prayers, and offerings performed inside were meant to ease the pharaoh's transition into the afterlife. Each day, priests would recite sacred prayers inside the pyramid chambers. symbolically offer food and nourish the pharaoh's soul. For the pharaoh was not merely a once living king, he was a god who continued to exist. But was it truly possible to reach the gods? The ancient Egyptians believed that the soul was divided into three parts after death: Ka, life force; Ba, personal soul; and Ak, divine light. The Ka remained in the tomb. The Ba roamed freely outside, but the Ak only emerged in those who were morally pure and would then unite with the gods. The grand architecture of the pyramids was designed according to the orientation of these soul elements. Vertical shafts allowed the soul to ascend to the stars, while horizontal passages enabled the Ka to return to the tomb. Every detail was sacred. Every stone was like a prayer. Over time, however, this belief system evolved. The number of gods increased, myths diversified, and the priests gained power, especially in the city of Thebes. The priests of Amun became so powerful that even pharaohs sometimes found themselves in their shadow. The fusion of Amun and Ra birthed a new deity, and the pharaoh was no longer just a celestial representative, but also a figure supported by this powerful priesthood. As the balance among the gods shifted, so too did the winds of politics. In the third part of our story, we now enter the world of those who served the gods, the priests, oracles, and masters of magic. Within the pyramids lay not just stone, but knowledge, and the guardians of that knowledge were the silent rulers behind everything. The footsteps echoing across the hot, scorching sands often follow the grandeur of the pharaohs. But there are other steps, quieter, deeper, and invisible, that belong to a different class altogether: the priests, the seers, and the keepers of secrets. Believing that Egypt was ruled solely by the pharaoh would be a grave misconception. According to ancient belief, an unseen hand had been guiding the fate of palaces, temples, and the people since time immemorial. That hand belonged to the priests, those who heard the voice of the gods, deciphered the language of the stars, and governed the threshold between life and death. Priests formed the invisible backbone of Egypt. They were not merely men of prayer, but also scholars well versed in astronomy, masters of mathematics, and experts in divine rituals. They were the ones who deciphered the secrets hidden in hieroglyphs, knew the sacred phrases to weigh the hearts of the dead, and predicted the future by reading the alignment of the stars. Beneath or within every great pyramid, there existed a class of priests. These individuals guided the pharaoh's soul after death, prayed for him, and prepared his body for eternity. Priests serving in the temples of Amun, in particular, wielded immense power. The priests of Amun-Ra in Thebes were nearly as powerful as pharaohs themselves. Over time, a significant portion of the state's tax revenues was allocated to them, allowing them to gain both economic and political clout. The great temple of Amun was not only a place of worship, but also a center of education and knowledge. There, priests worked day and night over thousands of papyrus scrolls. They calculated agricultural calendars from the movements of the stars, prepared potions and medicines to cure illnesses, and were believed to influence natural events through magical incantations. These priests were not just worshippers, they were also known as astrologers. State decisions were made, and wars were either started or halted based on the positions of celestial bodies. The phrase, "the stars are not favorable," could halt an entire military campaign. Especially the rising of the star Sirius marked the time of the Nile's inundation. To the priests, this was more than observation. It was a divine message, and each message held immense influence over the people, for the sky was the god's writing tablet, and the priests were its sacred interpreters. Oracles were those who foresaw the future and interpreted the divine will. In the prophetic chambers of the temples, surrounded by clouds of incense, they would enter deep trances, believed to communicate with the gods themselves. These individuals could guide a pharaoh's decisions, or even influence the rise and fall of rulers, for a single prophecy could instill either fear or hope in the hearts of the people. When the gods were angered, drought would follow. When appeased, abundance would reign. And behind every such interpretation stood a priest or an oracle. Magic in ancient Egypt was not merely legend. It was a recognized science. The power of magic, known as Heka, was the very force the gods used to create the universe, and the priests were masters of harnessing this Heka. Particularly, the Heka priests skillfully used enchanted words and amulets. A single mistake in the utterance of these words could bring catastrophe. Thus, every prayer, every magical phrase was taught through sacred rituals and entrusted only to the highest-ranking priests. Even pharaohs needed the guidance of priests to wield these magical forces. The mummification process was entirely under the control of the priesthood. This was not merely the preservation of a body, but a sacred preparation of the soul for the divine realm. The prayers, symbolic actions, and secret substances used during the embalming were all part of the magical process. After the heart was removed, a scarab amulet was placed in its stead to symbolize purity and the lightness of the soul. The priests involved in this procedure would sanctify their hands before each action, cleanse the body with prayers, and elevate it to divine purity. For the deceased, Pharaoh had to be reborn, and such a rebirth was only possible through the correct rituals and incantations. Some priests were special individuals who knew the secrets of the Book of the Dead. This book described the trials the soul would face in the afterlife. Every gate, every creature, every question required the correct answer. That's why copies of these texts were placed in the pharaoh's tomb. However, these writings were not in a language that everyone could understand. They were filled with symbols, and only the priests could comprehend these symbols. They guarded this knowledge as a sacred secret for centuries. Each new generation of priests passed it down only to their most trusted students, for knowledge was the source of power. But like all power, this too began to corrupt over time. Some priests used magic and prophecy for their own gain. Especially toward the end of the New Kingdom, the priests of Amun became so powerful that the pharaohs were pushed into the background. In some periods, the temples effectively became the true rulers. Pharaohs, like Horemheb, even waged war against this power. Yet fighting priests who spoke in the name of the gods meant risking the faith of the people. That's why every move had to be made with great caution. By the end of this section, it becomes much clearer that the magic of ancient Egypt was not merely in its stones, monuments, or statues. It was hidden in the whispered prayers behind those stones, in the calculations made under starlit skies, and in the sacred words placed upon a corpse's heart. This was not just a civilization, it was a realm of mysteries, and those mysteries were shaped by the hands of the priests. Now, we will explore how this mysterious belief system affected the common people, how everyday life was interwoven with rituals, and what an ordinary Egyptian expected from death. Ancient Egypt belonged not only to the kings, but also to the spirit of the people, a spirit that was deeply intertwined with the concept of eternity. In ancient Egypt, not only the pharaohs, but also the common folk were required to live in close connection with the gods. The presence of the divine was felt in every street, every market, every wall of every home. Temples were not just sanctuaries for the elite, but sacred spaces for ordinary people as well. Prayers recited before sunrise, incense burned along the banks of the Nile, and figurines placed at the entrance of homes. All these were expressions of a desire to build a bridge between life and death. For the Egyptian people, the true purpose of life was to prepare for the afterlife and to reach it without fault. Daily life for the people revolved around farming, practicing their trades, and serving the temples. But behind every action lay a ritual. Before stepping into the fields, a prayer was offered to the earth god Geb. During the harvest, thanks were given to the spirit of Osiris. Couples hoping to marry would make offerings to the goddess Hathor, and prayers were said to protective spirits like Bes. Before the birth of a child, every life event was tied to a divine order. If rain fell, the gods were pleased. If there was drought, it meant a sin had been committed. Thus, every experience in an Egyptian's life was perceived as a reflection of cosmic balance. Maintaining this balance was known as Ma'at. Ma'at was both a goddess and the symbol of universal order, justice, and truth. The pharaoh ruled according to Ma'at. The priests prayed in accordance with her, and the people were expected to live by her principles. Telling a lie, stealing, or breaking a promise was not merely a breach of law, it was an affront to Ma'at. Therefore, every action bore both a moral and divine consequence. People feared not just the king, but also standing before the gods. Even within homes, certain sanctities were preserved. Small altars dedicated to household gods adorned the walls. Protective deities were especially common. For example, the dwarf god Bes was believed to shield children from evil, while the female hippopotamus figure, Taweret, was invoked to safeguard women during childbirth. Though these figures resembled toys, the people attributed real power to them. Every home was its own universe, and maintaining the order of that universe was crucial. To the ancient Egyptians, death was not the end, but a passage, and this passage was not exclusive to pharaohs. Ordinary people, too, tried to make the necessary preparations for the life beyond. Of course, not everyone could afford a pyramid, but even simple tombstones, inscribed with prayers, papyrus scrolls containing guides for the dead, and basic spells etched into tomb walls demonstrated the people's deep faith. Everyone believed they would be judged in the Hall of Two Truths. There, their heart would be weighed against Ma'at's feather, and if the heart was heavier, the soul would be destroyed forever. Thus, living rightly was not only a worldly duty, but also a spiritual necessity. Funerals for the less wealthy were simpler, yet the symbols were never omitted. A body wrapped in a piece of linen might be buried alongside bread, a water jar, figurines, or even a papyrus scroll, each item believed to be essential for the soul's journey. Even if the body could not be fully preserved, the ultimate wish was for the soul to reach the gods. Especially common were small statues called shapti, placed in graves to serve their owner in the afterlife. These figurines would tend the fields of the next world and perform tasks on behalf of the deceased. Egyptian farmers, carpenters, stonecutters, and market vendors all lived in a world filled with gods, while also striving to prepare for the beyond. For if one was unprepared, the soul could be condemned to eternal loneliness. Every object placed inside a tomb had meaning. Fragrances were to attract the gods, food was to nourish the soul, and prayers were meant to protect it. That is why death was not feared. If one had lived righteously, death was the beginning of eternity. But it wasn't only belief that shaped the lives of the people. Social structure played a major role as well. At the bottom of society were the slaves. Although slavery in Egypt was not viewed as absolute imprisonment in the modern sense, these individuals, often prisoners of war, typically worked in households or temples and were granted certain rights. Above them were farmers and craftsmen. Notably, the workers who built the pyramids were often farmers conscripted seasonally, and they were fed and paid by the state. This system fostered a sense of mutual obligation between the people and the state. However, it was only the educated, priests and scribes, who could read and write. Scribes were among the few who possessed the knowledge of writing, and their skills were immensely valuable. These individuals would transcribe the people's wishes onto papyrus, compose prayers, and carry the desires of the deceased into the afterlife. Because the power of writing was believed to be intertwined with magic, scribes were sometimes considered just as sacred as priests. Hieroglyphs, words, and even certain symbols were thought to be directly connected to the gods. For this reason, people showed immense respect for the power of writing. In the beliefs of the common people, rituals involving magic and amulets were also highly significant. During the flooding of the Nile, incantations were used to pray for abundant and fertile waters. When children became ill, herbal remedies or potions were prepared alongside prayers. Healing was believed to reside both in plants and in words. Although the people could not communicate directly with the gods, they conveyed their wishes through symbols and spoken words representing them. This was not merely a religious practice. It was an inseparable part of daily life. All of these practices reveal how, even for an ordinary person, life in ancient Egypt was filled with gods, woven with rituals, and imbued with symbols. A farmer, a carpenter, or a fisherman would gaze at the stars, pray to the gods, and ponder the eternity awaiting after death. For life had to be lived according to Mayat, the divine order, and if that order was not preserved, chaos, represented by Apophis, the enemy of Isis, could return at any moment. Now, we shall turn our gaze to the grandest structures that embodied this sacred order and divine life. The temples, their architecture, their functions, and their connection to the people offer deep insight into the spiritual and societal world of ancient Egypt. For in Egypt, a temple was not merely a place of worship, it was a miniature model of the cosmos, the earthly dwelling place of the gods. In ancient Egypt, temples were not just places for conducting religious rituals, they were sacred sites where the gods were believed to descend into the world. At the same time, they served as the heart of the state and touched every nerve of society. Each temple was designed as an axis connecting the heavens and the earth. These structures were not merely dedicated to the gods. It was believed that the gods truly lived there. Every room, every statue, and every symbol within the temple served as a vessel to bring a mythological narrative into the physical realm. It was believed that anyone who stepped into a temple was embarking on a journey toward the creation of the universe itself. The outermost gates symbolized the chaotic outside world, which had to be left behind. Upon passing through this gate, visitors would enter a world governed by divine order. The temple's axis stretched from east to west, mirroring the path of the sun. Each chamber was a station in this divine cycle. The entrance courtyards were open to the public, while the inner sanctums were reserved solely for the priests. At the very heart of the temple lay the naos, the most sacred chamber, where the statue of the god resided. This was the heart of the universe. These statues were not merely representations. They were believed to be imbued with divine life. Each morning, the priests would awaken the statue of the god, bathe it, dress it, and offer food. This was not a mere ritual. It was a sacred act that maintained the balance of the universe. It was believed that if this ritual was neglected, the god would grow angry and catastrophe could soon follow. Therefore, temple rituals were never skipped. Every act, word, and movement followed a specific order. The priests were like cosmic technicians. Any misstep or misplaced word could disrupt the entire cosmic order. The architecture of the temples reflected this sacredness. Enormous columns, star-covered ceilings, walls inscribed with hieroglyphs. All of these were not just aesthetic, but deeply symbolic. The columns represented cosmic trees supporting the sky. The ceilings depicted the heavens, veiled by the goddess Nut's body. The inscriptions and reliefs on the walls recounted treaties with the gods, mythological battles, and sacred ceremonies. Every part of the temple mirrored the structure of the heavens and the earth, especially structures like the Karnak Temple represented the pinnacle of this sacred worldview. The Karnak Temple was not merely a place of worship, it was the very soul of ancient Egypt. Located in the city of Thebes, this vast complex was dedicated to Amun-Ra and was expanded over centuries by numerous pharaohs. The great hypostyle hall, with its forest-like columns, evoked the feeling of walking through a celestial garden. Each towering column symbolized the power of the gods, emphasizing both the smallness of man and the magnificence of divine authority. The temple served not only as a sacred ground for priests, but also as a bridge through which pharaohs communicated with the gods. However, the function of these monumental temples extended far beyond religious rituals. They were also economic, hubs of ancient Egypt. Each temple owned surrounding farmland, herds of livestock, and workshops staffed by skilled artisans. Those working within the temple complex represented some of the most educated and disciplined members of society. Thousands of individuals were employed in its administration: scribes, seal bearers, granary officials, cooks, bakers, water carriers. This system sustained both economic power and sacred order. Even the lowest strata of society were deeply connected to the temples. Through festivals, holy days, and sacred processions, ordinary people believed they had the chance to draw closer to their gods. During celebrations like the Opet festival, the god's statue would be paraded through the city on a sacred bark, drawing crowds into the streets in a wave of devotion and joy. These moments were perceived as divine encounters. The gaze of the god was upon them, and their prayers could be heard directly. Such festivals not only heightened the spiritual experiences of the masses, but also served as instruments of political legitimacy. The priests who served in these temples were not merely religious figures, they were also scholars. They were experts in fields such as astronomy, medicine, mathematics, and writing. Tasks like creating calendars, determining agricultural seasons, and monitoring the flooding cycles of the Nile all fell under their domain. In ancient Egypt, knowledge was believed to originate from the gods and was transmitted to the people through the priests. Thus, temples could be seen as the universities of the ancient world. Temples like those in Luxor and Dendera still bear the marks of these scientific pursuits. Star maps and astronomical depictions cover their walls. Goddess Nut's body adorned with stars, the arrangement of constellations, and the cycles of the sun and moon. This celestial knowledge informed the calendar, guided the agricultural timeline, and determined the dates of major religious festivals. Therefore, temples were not only linked to the otherworldly, they were intricately connected to this world as well. At the heart of every temple lay a sanctuary, or naos. This sacred space was completely inaccessible to the general public. Only the highest-ranking priests could enter, and only during specific rituals. Within this inner sanctum, the god's statue was kept, revealed to the world only on select days. This secrecy represented the god's majesty and unattainability. Offerings, incense, food, and hymns presented before the deity were all considered essential for maintaining the balance of the cosmos. The people had to be content simply knowing these rites were performed, for approaching the god directly was impossible for them. Every symbol within the temple reflected the cosmic order. The lotus flower represented rebirth, while the papyrus plant signified the continuity of life. Lion-headed deities stood for power, falcons symbolized the sky, and the divine nature of the pharaoh. The hieroglyphs inscribed on the walls were not merely informative. They held magical power. Writing was seen as the union of sound and thought with the divine. For this reason, each symbol was drawn with ritual precision and reverence. In conclusion, the temple in ancient Egypt was considered the most powerful link between the heavens and the earth. It was the dwelling place of the gods, the foundation of pharaonic, divine legitimacy, and the sacred mountain upon which the prayers of the people ascended. Each temple was a miniature model of the universe, with every stone, every carving, and every statue playing a role in that cosmic whole. Even if these structures were to crumble, the faith, knowledge, and power they embodied would continue to inspire the imagination of humankind for millennia. And now, we shall explore one of ancient Egypt's most mysterious and magnificent legacies, its tombs. From the shadowy corridors of the Valley of the Kings to the humble burial chambers of ordinary citizens, we will uncover step by step the architectural and symbolic journey through the realm of the dead. For the ancient Egyptians, death was not an end, but the beginning of a great transition. Life was merely the first stage of an eternal journey, and once the body died, the soul would pass into another realm of existence. This belief transformed their tombs into far more than simple burial sites. They became sacred structures, rich in symbolism and protected by divine forces, designed to guarantee a successful passage into eternal life. The construction of a tomb was almost as important as the building of a temple. Pharaohs, nobles, the wealthy, and even commoners were consumed with ensuring a safe existence after death. Tomb architecture in ancient Egypt underwent significant transformations over time. During the Old Kingdom, pyramids were predominant, whereas in the Middle and New Kingdoms, tombs, particularly rock-cut tombs, became more widespread. One of the most striking examples is the Valley of the Kings, located on the western bank of the Nile near Thebes. In this silent, barren valley, the pharaohs of the time were laid to eternal rest. Its location on the west side held symbolic meaning, as the west was associated with death in ancient Egypt. The setting sun marked the beginning of the realm of the dead. Pharaohs chose to be buried here to embark on their eternal journey toward the presence of the god Osiris. Although the tombs in the Valley of the Kings may appear unremarkable, from the outside, their interiors resemble cosmic chambers filled with sacred texts carved deep into the rock. These tombs served as maps of the afterlife, inscriptions and illustrations covering the walls, ceilings, and passageways include passages from the Book of the Dead, the Book of Gates, and the Book of Night. Every symbol was meant to offer protection against the dangers the soul might face. Every figure served as a spiritual guide. The pharaoh's soul had to traverse perilous passages, face fearsome creatures, and undergo divine judgment to ultimately reach the gods, as described in these texts. As the tomb corridors descend deeper into the earth, they move from darkness toward divine illumination. The entrance often faced east, symbolizing rebirth. The outer chambers typically held objects from daily life, such as statues, chests, and sometimes chariots. However, deeper within, celestial scenes dominated, ceilings adorned with star maps, sacred encounters with gods, and depictions of Osiris's judgment, all centered around the concept of immortality. Every detail was meticulously designed to guide the soul's passage through the afterlife. The mummified body of the pharaoh was usually placed in the most secure and hidden chamber of the tomb, inside a sarcophagus. These chambers were seen as spaces of cosmic rebirth and resurrection. They had to ensure not only physical protection, but also spiritual security. Hence, these tombs were filled with spells, amulets, and divine texts. Every gate the Pharaoh passed through, every being that judged him, and every trial he had to endure was preordained and carefully illustrated. The tomb of Tutankhamun, located in the Valley of the Kings, is among the best preserved examples of this sacred narrative. Howard Carter's discovery in 1922 was not just a historical milestone, but also an unveiling of a spiritual cosmos. However, this elaborate tomb architecture was not exclusive to pharaohs. Nobles and high-ranking officials also meticulously planned their tombs, commissioning detailed depictions of their life stories, prayers, and scenes dedicated to the gods on the walls. These tombs were designed to reflect the deceased's close relationship with the divine. Their worldly achievements, social status, participation in religious ceremonies, and family ties were vividly portrayed. The purpose was not only to be remembered, but also to maintain their status in the afterlife. For the ancient Egyptians, the social hierarchy continued beyond death. The figures and inscriptions found in tomb decorations were not merely for aesthetic purposes. Each served a specific function. For example, the frequently depicted field scenes on tomb walls symbolized that the deceased could continue farming in the afterlife, leading a productive existence. These scenes promised the dead an eternity of abundance. Offering tables laden with bread, beer, meat, and fruit were not merely symbolic. According to belief, the soul would actually feed on them. If these offerings were absent, it was thought that the soul might suffer from hunger. Another significant element found in tombs was the presence of Shabti figures. These small, typically blue-green statuettes were sent to the afterlife to work on behalf of the deceased. The ancient Egyptians believed that even after being accepted into paradise, the dead might still be required to perform agricultural labor. Shabtis were placed in the tomb as loyal servants ready to answer, "Here I am, master." Hundreds of Shabtis would be buried alongside the deceased to ensure their comfort and prosperity in the next world. A distinguishing feature of Egyptian tombs was also the magical amulets and sacred texts. The Book of the Dead served as a kind of guidebook. It instructed the soul on how to overcome the dangers it would face after death, what to say to the gods, and how to behave. This book did not appear in every tomb in the same form. There were personalized variations. Some sections were prepared specifically for pharaohs, others for nobles, and still others for priests. This shows that life after death was considered a unique, individual journey. In the afterlife, the soul would face a great trial, known as the weighing of the heart. The heart was weighed against the feather of the goddess Maat. If the heart was as light as the feather, meaning the person had lived a just, honest, and righteous life, they would be granted eternal life in the presence of the gods. If not, their heart would be devoured by the terrifying creature Ammit, who waited nearby. This was a true death, an absolute annihilation that destroyed both body and soul. For this reason, ancient Egyptians sought not only to be good people throughout their lives, but also to cultivate a light heart. Every detail within an Egyptian tomb was intended to ensure the continuity of life after death. Colors, too, were believed to be associated with the gods. Blue symbolized divine wisdom, green represented rebirth, and black denoted fertility and the immortality of Osiris. These colors were not chosen at random. Each was sacred, each a key that brought the soul closer to the gods. Similarly, the script used, hieroglyphics, conveyed not only information, but also magic. Writing a hieroglyph was akin to sealing a pact with the gods. Therefore, the Valley of the Kings is not merely a collection of stone structures. Each tomb in that valley is a sacred book echoing with divine silence, where the dream of immortality was etched into the walls thousands of years ago. These silent rock-cut tombs facing the setting sun are the timeless witnesses of Egyptian beliefs that proved more enduring than death itself, still alive beneath the sands of time. Now, we will explore in detail one of ancient Egypt's most iconic symbols, the process of mummification, both as a ritual and as a technical practice. How was the anatomy of existence beyond death constructed? How were substance, tissue, and spirit preserved? Let us continue learning together. In the utmost ancient Egyptian understanding of death, the body was considered the home of the soul. If this home were damaged or destroyed, the soul could not continue its eternal journey. Therefore, preserving the body was not merely a physical need, but a spiritual obligation, and thus was born one of the most intricate and ritual-laden death care systems in human history, mummification. It was not simply a medical or practical process, but a divine ceremony woven with deep meanings, prayers, and spells. For the ancient Egyptians, preventing bodily decay was equivalent to sealing an eternal covenant with the gods. The mummification process was not performed by ordinary individuals, but typically by authorized priests and specialized embalmers. These individuals held a unique status as their work involved not only the deceased, but also direct communion with the divine. Every act performed on the body represented a sacred stage that guided the soul's journey. The procedure consisted of three main phases: purification, preservation, and sanctification. The first stage was to cleanse the body of the filth of the world. This process began in a special tent on the banks of the Nile, in a purification place known as the Ibu. The first person to touch the deceased's body was an embalmer wearing a mask, usually representing the face of the jackal-headed god Anubis. Anubis was believed to be the guide of the dead and the protector of bodies. The embalmer would stand to the left of the body and begin washing it with sacred oils and Nile water. This cleansing was not merely a hygienic act. It was also a symbolic baptism meant to purify the soul from all impurities. Next came the removal of the internal organs. The ancient Egyptians understood that the internal organs were the first parts of the body to decay. A careful incision was made in the abdomen, and the stomach, intestines, lungs, and liver were extracted. Each organ was placed into canopic jars that represented the 4 sons of Horus. These jars were meticulously prepared with spells engraved upon them. It was believed that each jar was under the protection of a specific deity. Imseti guarded the liver, Duamutef the stomach, Hapi the lungs, and Kebesenuef the intestines. Interestingly, the heart was generally not removed. In ancient Egypt, the heart was considered the seat of thought and the center of the soul. It was believed that the soul communicated through the heart, and that the heart recorded every action taken in life. However, from the New Kingdom period onward, some mummies were found to have had their hearts removed. The reason for this remains debated. Perhaps embalmers believed the heart needed even better preservation for the day of judgment. One of the most challenging procedures was the removal of the brain. The Egyptians did not attribute much importance to the brain. In their view, thinking occurred in the heart. Therefore, the brain was extracted through the nostrils using hooks, or it was liquefied and drained from the skull. The brain was usually discarded and rarely preserved. This process required great precision, as the facial structure had to remain intact. Once the organs were removed, the drying process began. For this, the Egyptians used a natural salt mixture known as natron. Natron was a desiccating substance composed of sodium carbonate, bicarbonate, chloride, and sulfate. The body was completely covered with natron and left to dry for about 40 days. During this period, the family of the deceased would mourn, recite prayers, and offer sacrifices. Once the drying was complete, the body became quite light, firm, and sunken, but it still remained recognizable. After drying, the second stage began. The preservation of the body. The skin was softened, and the empty cavities were filled with resins. Linen or stones were inserted into the eye sockets, and the nose was reshaped for aesthetic purposes. The body was then carefully wrapped in linen bandages. These wrappings were not only protective, but also served as spiritual bonds. Special prayers, spells, and amulets were placed within each layer. For example, the scarab amulet placed over the heart was used to ensure the soul remained at peace with its heart. The spell inscribed on it began with, "O my heart, do not betray me in judgment." The embalming process took an average of 15 days. Each finger, every limb, was wrapped individually. On every layer, the deceased's name, prayers dedicated to the gods, and protective symbols were inscribed. Amulets were also hidden between these wrappings. Among these were symbols such as the Ankh, key of life, Ujat, protective eye, and Jed, pillar of stability. These symbols were believed to ensure the soul's safety in the afterlife. Once the wrapping was completed, the final stage began, blessing and burial. The mummified body was placed into various coffins, depending on the level of wealth. For nobles and pharaohs, multiple nested coffins were prepared. The outermost coffin was usually gilded, while the inner ones were made of painted wood. Each was decorated to associate the deceased with the gods. The innermost coffin, called the sarcophagus, was a stone coffin placed in the deepest part of the tomb. The burial ceremony was carried out with great pomp. A special ritual, called the opening of the mouth ceremony, was performed. In this ritual, priests symbolically opened the mummy's mouth with a tool resembling a small hammer. The purpose was to grant the deceased the ability to speak, breathe, and communicate with the gods. This ritual was the most critical step for the soul to become independent. Afterwards, food offerings were made, lamentations were recited, and prayers were said to the god Anubis. After the mummy was placed in the tomb, the entrance was sealed. However, this seal was not only a physical lock, but also a magical barrier. It was necessary to ensure the soul would rest in eternal peace and the sanctity of the tomb remained unbroken. For this reason, amulets were inscribed at the tomb's entrance and warnings were written. Inscriptions such as, "Whoever opens this tomb shall face the wrath of the cursed gods," were not merely meant to frighten, but were written in genuine belief. For the Egyptians, disturbing the soul's peace was equivalent to disturbing the balance of the entire cosmos. Mummification in ancient Egypt was not merely care for the dead, but preparation for eternal life. Every wrapping, every prayer, every amulet was a step taken and a bridge built to ensure the soul's journey to the gods. The mummy was not just a body, it was the vessel of the soul, the container of memories, and a symbol of eternity. Now, let us step into the daily life of the common people in ancient Egypt. The marketplaces, fields, household order, children's games, love letters, and the extraordinary beliefs of ordinary people. Beyond kings and gods, how did the real Egyptian people live? When one thinks of ancient Egypt, the first images that come to mind are massive and magnificent pyramids, golden sarcophagi, and the splendor of the pharaohs. However, beneath the surface of history, millions of ordinary people lived in the shadow of this grandeur. The hands that built the pyramids, the bodies that tilled the fields, the tongues that offered sacrifices to the gods. The lives of these silent heroes formed the true fabric of ancient Egypt. Without them, neither the gods would be sustained nor the power of the pharaohs endure. In the 8th chapter, we will enter the world of this people who have remained hidden from view until now. Before the sun's rays reflected on the waters of the Nile River, the people of Egypt would wake with the first morning light. Men mostly went to the fields, hitching their plows to oxen to till the crops. Agriculture was the backbone of ancient Egypt. With the annual flooding of the Nile, fertile lands were formed, and after these floods, the planting season would begin. Barley, wheat, and flax were the most common crops. Women, meanwhile, stayed home caring for children, spinning thread, grinding grain, and making beer and bread. Bread made from wheat was the staple food. Unleavened flatbreads were baked on hot stones or in ovens. Beer had become as essential as water and was often consumed with meals. The typical Egyptian house was a single-story structure made of mud brick. Its thick walls kept it cool in the summer and warm in the winter. Houses generally consisted of 3 rooms, an entrance area, a living space, and a storage room. The upper floor often had a rooftop terrace where people would sleep at night to cool off. Furniture was simple, beds made of reeds, clay pots, and a few pieces of furniture. Occasionally, images of gods or prayers were painted on the walls. This practice was important for blessing the house and protecting it from evil spirits. Children in ancient Egypt were considered both sacred and the source of joy. Boys and girls were taught different roles, and from certain ages expected to help with family tasks. They also played with toys, animal figurines, wheeled toys, rattles. Games similar to ball games and hopscotch were common. Education was available, mainly to children of wealthy families. Those attending scribe schools learned reading and writing and could later become priests, scribes, or administrators. However, the majority of the population was uneducated and passed down knowledge through oral traditions. Clothing and attire were designed simply and suited to the climate. Men generally wore linen skirts called shendit and left the upper part of their bodies bare. Women covered their bodies with long linen dresses and applied pleasant perfumes to their hair. Shoes were rarely worn. Most people went barefoot. To protect themselves from the sun, they tied cloths around their heads or wore hats. Wealthy women wore jewelry, applied kohl around their eyes, and scented their bodies with lotus flower fragrances. Kohl was not only used for aesthetics, but also to protect the eyes from infections. The majority of the population was polytheistic and desired a personal connection with the gods. Every family had its own deity at home. Small altars, statues of gods, and incense burners were placed in the corners of houses. When illness, drought, or bad luck occurred, prayers and wishes were directed to these figures, and offerings were made. One of the most widely worshipped gods was Bes. Bes was a short, plump, and cheerful god who protected homes from evil, facilitated childbirth, and cared for children. His figurines were especially found in the children's rooms or among women's personal belongings. Love, friendship, and marriage held deep significance for the ancient Egyptians. Love letters were written on papyrus scrolls. Men courted their beloveds with beautiful flowers and showy jewelry. The age of marriage was generally young. Girls typically married at 13 or 14, while boys were a few years older. Marriage was seen as a sacred union, and divorce was also quite common. Women had inheritance rights and were protected by marriage contracts. In this regard, ancient Egypt was far ahead of its time concerning women's rights. Marketplaces formed the heart of social life. In open-air markets, merchants, farmers, and artisans gathered. Fruits, vegetables, spices, fabrics, jewelry, oils, and medicinal herbs were sold. Instead of money, a barter system was used. A jug of beer could be exchanged for a dozen loaves of bread or a piece of linen. Women also played an active role in trade at the markets. These markets were not only places for selling goods, but also for exchanging stories, gossip, and news passed from person to person. The people of ancient Egypt were also very fond of entertainment. Music, dance, and storytelling were common. Songs were sung, accompanied by instruments such as the lyre, harp, flute, and drum. Festivals, harvest celebrations, and religious ceremonies were crowned with dances. At night, under the desert stars, around the fire, tales were told. These oral stories passed wisdom and life lessons from generation to generation. Storytellers were the keepers of the community's memory. However, not everything was idyllic. Drought, the failure of the Nile to flood, and locust invasions could drive the people into famine. Sometimes, droughts lasted for years. In years when the pharaohs failed, the people expressed their dissatisfaction through wall inscriptions in temples or lamentations. Still, death was a part of life. People never feared death. They accepted it as a gateway to another existence. Therefore, even ordinary people tried to prepare a small burial site a talisman, and arrangements for the afterlife. After all, every soul deserved to stand before the gods. The life of the common people depended on the rhythm of agriculture, the movement of the sun, the flooding of the Nile, and the grace of the gods. They were invisible, yet it was these unseen hands that carried the spirit of ancient Egypt through the centuries. And today, beneath the shadow of the colossal monuments, their traces still remain. In a pottery shard, a wall inscription, or a piece of linen scattered in the desert, ancient Egyptian art and architecture are the most impressive expressions of this civilization's cultural and religious understanding. This aesthetic heritage, shaped over thousands of years, has survived not only as visual beauty, but also as a language filled with profound symbols. Each pyramid, temple, statue, and fresco reflects Egypt's worldview, social structure, and its religious beliefs. Architectural structures were primarily built to demonstrate the power and divine status of the pharaohs. Among these, the pyramids are the most captivating and magnificent. These enormous stone masses climbing toward the sun symbolized both immortality and divine light. The weight of the stone blocks used in their construction, the order, and the engineering knowledge clearly reveal ancient Egypt's technological mastery. The labyrinthine corridors and mysterious chambers inside the pyramids were not only for protection, but also served as symbolic maps for the journey to the afterlife. Temples were not just places of worship, they were also centers of state administration, social order, and religious rituals. Large temple complexes like Karnak and Luxor were regarded as the homes of the gods. The hieroglyphs, mythological scenes, and reliefs depicting the relationship between the pharaohs and gods on temple walls preserved sacred texts and beliefs. These artworks also formed a visual language that helped the people connect with their gods. Statues were used to display the power and grandeur of the pharaohs and gods. They were typically symmetrical, idealized, and posed in an eternal stance. Pharaoh statues emphasized his divine aspect, while statues of gods symbolized their control over nature and the universe. The material, size, and details of the statues reflected the social and religious status of their owners. Frescoes and wall paintings covered a wide range of subjects from daily life to religious rituals. Their colorful and detailed depictions kept alive the mythology, history, and everyday life of the Egyptians. Every color, figure, and even pose was full of meaning. For instance, green symbolized life and fertility, while blue represented the sky and divine protection. This symbolic language of art was understood and respected by all classes of Egyptian society. Therefore, artists created their works not only with aesthetic concerns, but also with cultural and religious responsibilities. These works carried meaningful messages both to the living and to future generations. Finally, ancient Egyptian art and architecture are a legacy that has defied time and reached us intact. Their colossal pyramids, magnificent temples, finely crafted statues, and vibrant frescoes are not just history, they are regarded as a shared treasure of human culture. At the end of this long journey, I hope you've been able to feel how fascinating and profound the dreams of eternity of the pharaohs, gods, and their legacies rising in the shadow of the Egyptian pyramids truly are. Thank you for watching our video until the very end. Please don't forget to share your thoughts and how you feel right now in the comments. See you in the next new videos. Goodbye.